Hi everyone, it's Ardith, and today I've got a fun card using a whole bunch of Tonic Studios products, sometimes in ways I didn't expect. I started by taping a panel of watercolor cardstock to a board, and then taping the Hefty Doodle Circles of Life stencil over top. I wanted to try using one of the new Tonic Nuvo shimmer powders through a stencil to see what I would get. I spritzed the panel quite a bit with a Nuvo Light Mister. This spray bottle gives a fine mist, so I needed quite a few spritzes to get it wet, but I figured the more water, the better the shimmer powder would react. I used the Falling Leaves color to get a pretty green background. I tried various ways of tapping gently on the bottle. You really want a balance between getting enough powder out and dumping it all on the page. I love how this green powder separated out into blue and yellow speckles as I sprinkled it. I kept to the edges of my panel as I wanted a white area to stamp a little scene later. When I had what I thought was enough powder down, I picked up the stencil, and I really wanted a more filled-in background. Now that I'm watching the video, I kind of wish I had left it as it was and let it develop in the water over time, just to see where it ended up, but I'll try that another time. This time, I put the stencil back down, and I pulled out a Nuvo Aquaflow brush to spread the color around the panel while still hopefully retaining some of the stencil outlines. Because of the water on the panel, I didn't add any water from the brush barrel. I just used the bristles to move the color around until I felt like I had better coverage. At that point, I lifted the stencil and dried the panel with my heat gun. There was definitely less stencil definition than I had expected, but I could still see some of the circle patterns, and I started feeling a bit like a mixed media queen. While I was drying it, I noticed that there was still a lot of pigment on the stencil itself. So once I had the panel dry, I turned the stencil over and pressed down with my fingers to add another layer of color. I wasn't sure how it would work with these powders, but again, I was happy with the result. It seemed to actually increase the look of the stencil detail, and I dried the second layer with my heat gun. Don't forget this powder has a beautiful shimmer to it, and along with the texture from the stencil and the layered pigment, this background has a ton of interest. Next, I created my scene using an elephant stamp from the Ellie's Gone Nuts Adorable stamp set from Tonic Studios. I wanted to have two elephants kind of kissing, so I used my Waffle Flower Water Media Mat as well as my Misty to do some mirror stamping. I put the stamp down where I wanted it on my watercolor panel, and I lined up the bottom of the panel with the ridge in the Water Media Mat. I figured I would stamp the mirror image first because it would be much easier to stamp the original image to match it up once it was there. I put the stamp onto the Water Media Mat in approximately the right place, and then I picked it up with the Misty door. I had removed my mouse pad from my Misty to fit the mat into it, similar to what you would do when using a cling stamp in the Misty. I used VersaFine Onyx ink, which is a watercolor-friendly ink, and I stamped it down before using the corner of the mat to lay down my background panel. This allowed me to re-stamp it, which I really needed to do since the watercolor cardstock is bumpy. I should probably just use the smoother side of this cardstock, but I never seemed to think of it at the time. Somehow the bumpy side feels more authentic. Anyway, once I had the mirror image elephant stamped, I replaced the mouse pad in my Misty, placed the watercolor panel in the corner, placed the elephant exactly where I needed it, and then I stamped the original image with the same VersaFine Onyx ink. I also stamped some tiny hearts from the set right above where their trunks meet, and then I finished my little focal area with a hug sentiment from the set. Next up, a little easy watercoloring. I use a piece of laminated white cardstock as a palette so I can see the true colors. For the elephants, I used Twilight and Blackjack for my grays, and I simply smooshed a bit of each onto the palette. I used my Aquaflow brush to pick up the lighter gray, and I put a wash down on the first elephant. While it was damp, I went back in with some of the darker gray ink to create some shading and shadows. I find it's pretty easy to control the water with this brush. It definitely saves having to have a cup of water on my desk. I added a bit of It's a Girl, which is a very light pink, to the ears, and I blended it out so that there's just a hint of pink there. I used one of the newest Catherine Pooler ink colors, Rouge, to color the 3 tiny hearts over the elephants. And finally, I used a mix of the two grays to create some ground for them, so they don't look like they're floating in air. To add more shimmer and dimension, I used Nuvo Dream Drops in dragon scales scattered around the elephants and Love Potion directly on the hearts. The Love Potion Dream Drops are really a pale pink, but they are translucent as well as iridescent, so the red hearts still look quite red. I love how the green textured background makes them look like they're sitting in a clearing in the jungle. To finish the card, I trimmed the panel and popped it up on a white card base. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up below and subscribe to my channel for even more inspiration. Product links are below in the description and also on my blog. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.